I want to say to the audience, Salama Datang, which means you are welcome to come. And then I want to say Akakabar. Everybody say, bike, Saja bike. Bike, Saja bike. Okay. That's the equivalent to us saying, how are you? I'm just fine. I lived in Indonesia for 4 years. My husband worked for an oil company. It was Atlantic Richfield at the time, which later became BP. And they, down in Tacoma, actually, they had built this big barge. They called it a barge, but the people that worked on it was a platform for bringing up gas and storing gas. Previously, the installations in the Java Sea for oil, they had just been letting the gas go. So they wanted to keep it and sell it and all that. So they built this huge thing that they towed over there, and it was a tank farm at sea, and it had a hotel on it for the men, a place for the men to stay and a place for them to eat. It had a helicopter landing. It had a lab, and I believe it had a medical office. And the men went out there and they stayed for 2 weeks, and then they were home for 3 or 4 days and they went back. It was very exciting for us to go off to Indonesia to live. We were supposed to be there anywhere from 4 to 6 years. I had a terrific job, but I was quite willing to give it up because I wanted to see the world. Very few people, when I talk to them, are clear about where Indonesia is. So I'm going to show you where Indonesia is. Here's Australia, okay? And this is an archipelago of islands. There are 1,700 of them. That's Indonesia. And 600 of them are inhabited. And they know that there are islands out there with natives on them that don't even know they belong to a country. Or at least it was that way when I was there, which you have to understand was from 1975 to 1979. So just above that, Indonesia is Malaysia and Singapore, and then you go up to Vietnam and Thailand and up in that way. And then of course this is the South Seas over here. And this is the west coast of the United States. And this is the east coast. So where you are when you're in Indonesia, you are just about exactly halfway around the world from the United States. And it takes quite a while to get there. And Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world. And a lot of people don't realize that because they sort of assume it's Saudi Arabia or somewhere over in that part of the world. When I lived there, it was the 5th most populous country in the world. I see now, when I checked some facts and figures yesterday, that it's now considered the 4th most populous. Don't ask me what became 5th, because I didn't get that far. I don't know. So, Jakarta, and if you'd like to come up and look at this after this is over, if you're unclear as to where it is. You know, the funny thing was when I was going over there, people didn't know where I was going, and they thought I was going to the Caribbean. They thought there was that archipelago of islands. Or they said, oh, you're going to be so close to Vietnam. Aren't you worried? Aren't you worried? And you really aren't that close to Vietnam. The good thing you're close to is you're 2 hours away, maybe an hour and a half from Singapore. And the company would send us there for medical and dental, which we could always make up something, especially women could do that. And so we had all these lovely shopping trips in Singapore, and it's one of my favorite places in the world, Singapore. Jakarta now has 9 million people. living in it. It's a very large city. When we were there, it was 7 million people. And I understand that that 9 million jumps up to 11 million daily because 2 million more come into the city from the suburbs to work. So they're getting a little concerned about overcrowding. At one time, they imported people from the countryside to come to Indonesia, and it looks like what they'll be doing will be deporting them back out into the country to cut down on the population there. It's very rich in natural resources, and that's why a lot of foreign countries were there when we were there, because they were trying to bring Indonesia back in, bring it out of its third worldness, which was, by teaching them how to do things that they didn't know how to do. And agriculture and oil is the mainstays of their economy. Although they have wonderful craft work, the batiks, the silver jewelry, ceramics, just marvelous things that they do import. And they deal also, they export a lot of tea and nickel and coffee, spices. The religion is 87% Muslim. As I said, it's the largest Muslim country. And it also has Hindu, Christian, and Buddhism. The minority there are the Chinese. But they are Chinese Indonesians. They were mostly born in Indonesia, but they were always treated as second-class citizens. I think the Indonesians resented them because they were the money makers, they were the storekeepers. And when I was there in Indonesia, you were either terribly, terribly, fantastically rich, or you were very, 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 very poor. There was no middle class at that time. So when I was leaving, they were starting to get a middle class because they had trained Indonesian engineers. They were training women to be secretaries in these different companies from the countries from all over the world that were there, had trained them. We had servants. We had...
When are questions appropriate?
At the end. Okay. We had servants, a houseboy, house girl, a yard boy who also opened the gate. It was very important to have someone open the gate to let the car in and out for some reason. I guess so the driver didn't have to get out and do it. And of course we had the driver. And so it was a pretty opulent life. And these people, their salaries were pittances, and it came about that we paid more than other people in the neighborhood, so other people in our neighborhood didn't like that because those servants were getting more. But when we left, we gave them extra money because she was going to have a second baby, our house girl. And that would mean that she wouldn't have to work while she was pregnant. And then he wanted to be a driver. He wanted to move up from being a houseboy. So we gave him the money, to get a driver's license and do whatever he had to do to become a driver. Because they were really, really good people. And we loved them, and we loved their little baby that she had while they were there. So the history briefly is that back in the 1st and 2nd century AD, the Hindu priests and traders came there. And that's why the Hindu religion is still strong there in some parts of the country, particularly Bali and in central Java. And that's where these wayang puppets came from originally, from the Hindu. And I'll tell you more about that after a while. And then they had a whole succession of people inhabiting them, Portuguese and British and the Dutch. And finally the Dutch made them a colony and had a really strong presence there and kept them under their thumb. And Then the Japanese came in the Second World War and threw the Dutch out and occupied the country. And then, of course, the war ended and the Indonesians revolted.
All available assistance to customer service, please. Auxiliary customer service. Thank you.
The Indonesians revolted and
I've got the pictures now, ma'am. I have the pictures.
But she's not ready for them until later.
The picture.
no, I'm not ready for them. I'll tell you when I'm ready. Yes. Okay.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Yay,
So the Indonesians revolted, and women worked beside men, and they got their freedom, and they wouldn't allow the Dutch to come back. And as a matter of fact, at the time that I lived there, they were just allowing Dutch to come in as visitors. Because the Dutch love Indonesia, and they wanted to bring their grown children to show them where they had lived, you know. So, 1949, they created their own Declaration of Independence. So, now it's a lot different. The middle class are more prominent. There's even in the Sunday Times last week, there was a big article about Indonesian women selling and using Tupperware. Do you remember Tupperware? And I guess a lot of Indonesian women are making, housewives are making big money now selling Tupperware.
Avon is next.
They're businesswomen now. And I guess someone who visited over there told me that you see all these people walking around on the streets with iPads and so on. So I'm sure it would be quite a different place than when I was there. So I try to keep up a little bit. I read the Indonesian newspaper. One thing is that has changed is the government. I mean, it's still saying that their Declaration of Independence created, and they have a president, and it was always one of the generals in the military. So this last election that just happened end of last year, they had a general versus a mayor of Jakarta, who was just a country boy. And he won. He won in all his progressive ideas, and of course corruption has always been rampant in Indonesia, and he pledged to get rid of that and so on and so forth. So an interesting quote from him not too long ago in the news about terrorists was that they were going to fight their terrorism with cultural education because they are a multicultural country. And instead of security, they're going to fight it with it. So we'll see how that works out. Okay. Now, I have to tell you one more thing before I read, and that's about the Borobudur Hotel. You have never been, maybe you have, but okay, I've never been a place like it, and probably never will be again. First of all, it was just huge on acres and acres in downtown Jakarta. And it had a shopping mall in it. It had tourist offices in it. It had a bowling alley. It had the biggest swimming pool I ever saw. It had a place out back to keep your pets. It had 5 tennis courts. It had about 5 restaurants or bars. And it was just magnificent. And to walk through the lobby was like being at a meeting of the United Nations, because there was all these people from all the world. And you'd see the sheiks with their flowing robes, and the British ladies in their white gloves, and the Japanese chattering, and it was just, it blew my mind away. But anyway, I just wanted you to know, when you hear about the Borobudur Hotel, what it was like, some idea of what it was like to live there. Now, remember, this book is set in 1976. It's a representative year of those 70s. And it was also the year of our bicentennial, if you remember. So, what I'm going to read to you is the prologue of the book because that sets up the book. I am Nelia, born of Indian parents in Indonesia, an archipelago of many islands washed by the waters of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. I absorbed tolerance for the white man's world in a Methodist orphanage on Sumatra. But it is on Java I live now, and as here I am content, studying Wayang Kulit, shadow plays of puppetry that tell Hindu epics thought to have been brought here by my forebears and passed down through centuries of change in this my adopted country. In Jakarta, I ply my trade, singing and playing the piano in the Pendopo lounge of the Hotel Borobudur, a way to support those studies. This capital city of 7 million people sets the business and social standards of Indonesia. To it have come many foreigners to exploit us and to teach us modern technology and accidentally new ways of living. But it is the Western women who fascinate me. When they arrive, they are scared, defiant, preoccupied with one another. Some are physically ill until their bodies adjust to our heat, light, food, and drink. And they do not know us. We are as strange a fruit to them as that in the baskets placed every week in their elegant hotel rooms. Where insulated, they are lulled to believe they are somewhere familiar. Somewhere they recognize themselves. They share a fantasy of their previous life as a perfect one in a perfect place that will be the same the minute they return home. In the Wayang philosophy, using the mythical worlds of the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, everyone has a different role to play in society and must know that role. Queens behave as queens. Clowns behave as clowns, just as expatriates behave as expatriates, and Indonesians as Indonesians. The ladies of the Borobudur struggle with problems they brought with them, while my fellow citizens grapple with puzzlements presented by the foreigners. Situations neither would have encountered had they been somewhere else. I am only the musical background to their life, but I watch and listen, feeling their pain, seeing them entangled in problems of choice, not easy to call good or evil. For choice is central to the Shadow Plays encyclopedia of human problems. Misery or hope, joy or sorrow, defeat or triumph, love or hate. And in the depth of these shadows, as well as prejudice, lust, greed, envy, compulsion, things we can see but cannot touch, at once real and not real. To understand it all as well as the warring cultures inside myself, I would that it were something as familiar to me as a performance of the Wayang. But alas, the stories are all in the process of being invented. But perhaps the Dalai knows, for he is part